Live.
We are back. I'm Rye, this is Stockroom, and the topic today is PolyTalks and Wry Relationships. And I'm here with a few new guests. We're at part 2 of our panel today, and I am going to let them introduce themselves, because they know themselves better than I do. If you could go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm Dr. Leanna Wolfe. I'm an anthropologist and a sexologist, and I've looked at alternative lifestyles for many years. I've done research all over the world on non-monogamy, and I did my doctoral dissertation on polyamory and jealousy.
Dr. Wolfe is so modest. She's also quite the prolific author. And we met at one of these events a few years ago. You were in the audience.
That's true.
And you just had me recently at your sexuality salon.
Yeah, I have a sex and culture salon, and you came and gave a fabulous presentation.
I wanted to be there for your retirement as a professor,
Right.
But it was the same night as my birthday.
I know. I don't know how that was, but the presentation I did there was so amazing. I like scanned my whole career and only had to pick about like 5 different projects that I'd done that I went into little detail on, and it was amazing to look back on it. And I'm obviously still working and doing things, but I'm just not going to teach at a community college for as long as I am.
Yeah, you're more free now to pursue what you want to pursue.
Definitely.
I'm really happy to have you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Erin, if you could.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Erin Tillman, aka the Dating Advice Girl. I've been a dating coach here in LA for 10 years. Gosh, I've done a lot, almost everything you can do in the dating space. So one-on-one coaching, I do consent and sexual safety workshops on college campuses. I've written a book called The Dating Guidebook. I have another book coming out later this year, early next year. I jumped into the matchmaking industry recently. That was so many stories. And you know, my tagline is empowering singles in the dating process, because I just feel like, especially in Los Angeles, a lot of singles feel totally powerless in the dating process, regardless of lifestyle, and aren't really clear about what they want. And so I help singles get clear on what they want, and then begin the coaching or help them find, you know, what lifestyle or what dating or relationship style they're looking for.
It proves there's an audience here since nobody can see it on the video. No, but it's an important thing, that way the audience can have some intimity. Everyone wants to be on this stage and blast it out there. And, you know, you were the opposite of that. You were very blasted out onto the internet.
I love promotion and marketing.
You actually built my website as well.
That's true. You're welcome.
If you could introduce yourself, Glenn.
I'd be happy to. Hi everyone, I'm Glen Olson. I'm a long-time fan of Rye and a new acquaintance. I like that.
I like that too.
Very good. Well, I'm kind of on the panel today because Rye heard me talk about a book that I'm writing, which is at the moment titled Fears of Polyamory in America, Seen Through Our Eyes. My background is not actually in sociology or anthropology, but I've become the accidental historian of polyamory from the fact that I've pretty much wound up being at the place that important events were happening in the polyamory movement for the last 40, 45, 50 years. So I've got a lot of knowledge about that. I've lived in 2 open marriages and have been polyamorous since high school. At the moment, I'm midway through writing my book. I have my co-author in the audience, Terry Russell. She has been a long-time member of Family Synergy, which was a very early group. And she started a group called Live the Dream, which is a 20 years long, continuously running a group, a polyamory support group and educational group. And that means, she corrects me, 30, but I know, because I'm the historian. So this movement has been around for a while. We may have invented it here in America, but we have been adding to it all along, and there's a big platform and a lot of depth that people can stand on and become successful in whatever kind of relationships they want to have today.
On that note, I want to clarify something that I recognize a distinction between non-monogamy as a behavior and modern-day polyamory as a culture, and how specifically American polyamory. You know, I think a lot of things can fit under that umbrella over the thousands of years. But there is a specific culture which is being forged today, especially in the last 50 years.
Exactly. Non-monogamy was invented, I think, maybe 1 million years ago. We all used to live in small tribal groups. The ideas of sexual exclusivity was just not possible at that time, and wasn't desirable either. But as we became a more very technological society, we came up with different philosophies, and among them was smaller family groups and smaller sexual groups, until eventually the norm has become the last several hundred years in a lot of Western societies anyway, a thing we call polyamory. But all through the history of human beings, we've had situations where people have had multiple sexual partners. Here in America, we always felt like we invented everything. We're sure we invented sex. Isn't that right?
I personally invented sex.
You personally invented sex. I helped. but actually, the basis of what a lot of people are doing today in ethical, multiple sexual and loving relationships, that is a newly coined term called polyamory, is really developed based upon three different dynamics and scenarios, and one of them has been in the terms of philosophy and psychology, one has been termed in human respect, and we floated away from the ideas of defining what we will do sexually with people based upon what our religions tell us to do. And so in America, what we have started to do is make personal choices based upon what's best for ourselves and the people that we're involved in, and talk with each other about it. And we use these modalities to build our successful relationships with ourselves and with everyone else.
Thank you, Glenn. I want to open up to the field here with questions.
Right there. Yay.
Is part of my classes. I'm not exactly sure what the at dusk critique is, so I'm probably the worst person to assess that. But if somebody wants to, my general sense is that Glen and his wife made it into sort of a Gesso story where it's more complicated. But you're really going to have to update me on this.
The main critique from a book called Sex at Dusk, which is self-published, available online, I've read both. Sex at Dusk's main criticism is selection bias and confirmation bias when it comes to the academic research and studies that has done, basically condemning it as pop science. One of the most damning examples that I remember is that they looked at modern-day existing isolated tribes in South America, and they found two that were particularly non-monogamous tribal societies. And cited their sources, and they said, well, this is what it looks like when civilization, quote-unquote, does not destroy the noble savage. Right? In Sex at Dusk, it references that reference and says, well, yes, those two tribal societies exist, but so do 10 others in that area that are extremely monogamous. And so they've chosen to look at the data that supports their theory.
Yeah, but in anthropology we do that. We look at human possibilities and human potentials. And if there is a tribe that has invented a particular way of thinking, and living and processing, we're interested in studying them. So, one such tribe in the Amazon are the Canal. And they were known for their group sex festivals. They were known for a practice called paternity, where they believe that it takes multiple nations to build a baby, and a baby can either be built during the pregnancy from one father or from several fathers. And if several fathers are visiting the mother during her pregnancy, each of their qualities are going to be imbued in the baby. And they believe this, and because they believe this, their children are better supported in life because there's more people watching out for them. And while they're in utero, they're all visiting the mother and bringing her gifts of food, getting her better nourished. So there are positive spins from these practices, and so be it if it's not widely practiced or not practiced much anymore. Nonetheless, it was a human invention, and it's worth paying attention to.
What I particularly like about Sex at Dawn is the effect it's had on the mainstream conversation on these topics. And that's, I will make a similar and controversial compliment for 50 Shades of Grey. Mainstreaming these conversations, even if it isn't 100% accurate, even if it isn't perfect, is worthwhile.
Yeah, I can speak to that for sure. A lot of the people I coached and worked with, and especially at the matchmaking agency, which is an older demographic, baby boomers up to like 70-year-olds, a lot of them have never even heard the word polyamory before, or they immediately go to polygamy, and I'm like, no, this is what it is. And so I will say that these things in the media, or books, movies, all these things are opening people's eyes to different lifestyles that they maybe had never even considered before or heard of, or had an idea about that seemed scary or sinning or all these things that we teach in society. So even if it's not 100% accurate, or if it's one person's view of how their lifestyle is, or their pairing, or their partnership, it's still a great way to see, for other people who've never been exposed to those things, it's like, oh, okay, because again, I do work more with mainstream single people, so I've made it part of my brand to intersect or interject all of these things into that, so people are just aware and know what's happening, and know what's even possible in 2016.
So how does it play out? Do you get people who you're able to consider another path than what they thought they had to do?
I mean, sometimes it happens. I feel like a lot of times people just feel like they're doing it wrong, whatever that means for them.
Because they're not getting into a monogamous relationship that lasts very long.
That they're not happy. And they're like, why are all my relationships unhappy or destructive or abusive or doing wrong? And a lot of single people haven't taken the time to look at oneself and see, what do I actually want? Am I just pursuing things that my parents want me to pursue, that society wants me to pursue? And so I help with that. And then once they're like, oh, okay, I can actually look at myself and figure out what might work for me. Erin, dating advice girl, what are the options? And then I present options, and that's when it's like, for some people, so.
I'd also like to add that this topic started with Sex at Dawn versus Sex at Dusk. Another book that's quite relevant is Sperm Wars, which came out in the mid to late 90s, I believe 96. And when you add up the message of each of these books, basically Sex at Dawn makes the claim that the natural order, the caveman, prehistoric order, was some form of consensual non-monogamy. Sex at Dusk claims the realities of our emotions, our DNA, our everything is based in possession and jealousy, and that monogamy has been more the norm as it is today, where there is mainly monogamy and then all these outliers, more of a minority group. And Sperm Wars contends that cheating is the natural order, and that genes are inherently selfish. Their main purpose in all of life, whether it's virus or humanity as a virus, is to be with maximum advantage, and cheating is a way to get an advantage. I can see the truth in all these things, and there's a lot of overlap.
Well, the base of all of these things is that humans are not a monogamous species, and we manage it in different ways, depending on who we are, what we're aware of, what culture we're living in, and what culture we may identify with. So, certainly, the sex at dawn theory of largely polyamory and, group marriages and bonded communities is, also something that can be very, very attractive to current people who are trying to practice polyamory, because they look at this and say, hey, humans have a very deep history in this, and this really is sort of who at core that we are. And, and then as for the sex at dusk, it sounds like the theory of pair bonding.
Largely, yes.
Yeah, and largely pair bonding is, different stages, and there's like the lust stage where you can lust after many people, and then there's the attraction phase, which is very hormonally driven, and when it gets very, very focused and obsessed with one person, and then that transitions or can transition to the attachment phase, which is calmer and more kind of open to something else if something else is also there. And then there's withdrawal, because it may not work out, because everything may have shifted. And then, certainly the cheating model is a model that's really widely recognized here in the Western world. And that's largely how we've handled non-monogamy, is through some kind of don't ask, don't tell, or don't ever find out. But we're nonetheless super intrigued by all of it. So many soap operas are driven by it. So many tabloids are filled it. And we can
Political leaders are in the mix with it.
Yeah, so we can't ever get enough of it, because it's what keeps us alive. Like, to meet someone new, have them really feel exciting. That's, something we all love. And in one of my analyses of polyamory, the way that poly people were the happiest is if they had a mix of a home relationship with stable partner or partners and new people that kicked up their dopamine, made life super interesting. And so you could either get people through cheating, but if you're poly, you get the new people through consent.
And possibly your husband or wife or boyfriend or girlfriend brings them home and introduces them to you.
Oh, that sounds too safe.
Oh, okay.
For the cheaters of the world.
Oh, that's true. Well, we don't get a kickback from Chris Ryan for stopping for his book. It's a wonderful book. I just wanted to give one. There's something in there for everybody. One of the most endearing stories that I thought was in that book had to do with apparently there was a French Catholic priest who had gone on a missionary thing in the early 1700s, and he wrote about it in his diary, and the book quotes it, and it says, while he was with this little community for a while, he eventually got very angry with the person that he was that was hosting him, that he was staying with him, and he asked him, he says, but you let your wife, and this French priest thought he had identified what they had as husbands and wives. He says, you let your wife sleep with other people. How can you do that? Doesn't it bother you that the children might not be yours? And the man looked at me and he said, you French only love your own children. We love all the children. And that, for me, that just nailed community.
Right. It goes back to even the notion of it takes a village to raise a child.
There's the example of the way that we structure lineage, matrilineal, patrilineal, and an extreme might be the Trobriand Islanders, where the woman's brother is the father of her children. So it doesn't matter who impregnated her in the tribe. That matters not. What matters is that the uncle raises those kids no matter what. That would totally change your perception of monogamy because you're not having sex with the brother or father. It's coming from somewhere else. And so that it ties to what you're saying about loving all the children as part of the family.
Yeah, and it comes back to our very deep ethnocentrism about how it should be and how kinship should be. And the first peoples who started being very judgmental about this were the Europeans, like Lewis Henry Morgan, who was finding out about kinship structures in other parts of the world and declared that they were all uncivilized compared to humans. And so again, when you're looking, the French person you're talking about, he was like looking at it from an ethnocentric perspective, not considering that kinship there was was accurate for those people, and that their way was an absolutely manageable and usable way.
In the modern day, we have stepfathers and stepmothers commonplace, adoption commonplace. This genetic lineage is often relevant, and you'll see families of multiple divorces where everyone is in the same room together.
And so they're really functioning as wife-in-laws and husband-in-laws.
Yeah, I think that, honestly, I think that everything's kind of, I feel like everything's in a transitional state right now, just in our society as a whole. Politics is evolving, gender is evolving, relationships are evolving, like this is the time. And so it's I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like right now, it's like new thinking versus old thinking. And there's a lot of people, especially, let's just say in the world, it's changing very rapidly, and it's very scary for a lot of people, because they don't understand. We don't teach these things in a like I said earlier, I do consent workshops and college campuses, and the number of 18 to 20-year-olds who have never had a consent workshop or a sex ed workshop where you're actually talking about the body parts we possess, because it's taboo, and we assume their parents taught them, but a lot of these kids, their parents haven't taught them, and it's like, this is all in flux, and the more education we can get out there about these things, the less taboo, the less scary, less judgmental I feel like we'll be to each other, regardless of lifestyle or gender, all of these things.
I've been really fascinated by this whole notion of consent because it's really changed a lot recently. When I was coming of age, the whole notion was something that sort of came out of an author that, I don't know if you guys ever heard of, Warren Farrell, where he wrote a book, "Why Men Are the Way They Are," and he noted that there were something like 180 different steps between no, maybe, and yes. And so for a guy to get a woman to eventually say some version of, now with current notions of consent, it's simply yes means yes.
Well, it's interesting because I just did an interview project on my radio show here. Lovely Rouge was a part of it. And I asked different age groups and different ethnicities like what they thought of consent and where they learned it. And Rye actually hosted a consent summit earlier this year where it was people from all different communities and lifestyles, leaders in all communities and lifestyles in LA talking about consent in their communities and problems with it. And what struck me, and I don't know if we've actually ever talked about this, but what struck me was it was very clear that people, I'm in my mid-30s, people younger than me were very, very aware of consent, regardless of gender. And then above older than me, there were all these, but is it really no? And I don't know, that's a gray area. It was very clear older than me. It was like, it was more about, there was more privileged statements and entitlement, but is that really a no if she says no? And it was very interesting to see the age differential there.
Yeah, and one of the things, because I am older, is that I had no ability to even feel interested unless somebody put a lot of attention on me and ran through the no's to the maybes to finally getting me to say yes. And
100% can relate to that.
And so I'm like miffed at how a younger person could simply, if she was female, would simply be able to say yes with no persuasion or no seduction, and that she would just totally know that she meant yes.
A lot of, sorry ladies, I feel like a lot of female identifying people, we sometimes make it very easy, maybe a little too easy for male identifying people. And what I say, again, in the dating realm, I feel like we've made it so easy. I speak as a woman, obviously, not obviously, but yes. I feel like we've made it very easy for men to not court us and then get angry at men for not courting us. And it's like, well, okay, so regardless of gender, we need to be aware of what we're putting out there. And are we even letting that person come present the
there's all he can do is trip and fall and look like an asshole.
I want to represent a spectrum on this topic, and I relate to it in a big way. I often find myself putting women into the position of courting men, because it's one of those things where sometimes supply and demand is at work here, and a perception of if it's easy, it's not worth it, and if it's worth it, it's not easy, that kind of thing. And there's other scenarios where it's literally like, all right, who wants to suck my dick, right? And both can be appealing, right? Depending on the scenario that I'm in. So my point here is that being in alignment with your own values is extremely important, and the things that you value, you need to make sure that your partner is valued.
Yeah. And
at the same time, our values can be fluid, they can change depending on the year or the month or the day. And at no point do I want to shame people who are interested in the simplest, easiest, quickest, Tinder or whatever kind of, hey, you're hot, let's fuck. It's totally fine if that's in alignment with your own values in that moment.
And I just want to jump on board with that real quick. I am not shaming anyone who, like what you said, but what I do have an issue with, especially in coaching, is when someone's like, I don't understand why this is the way it is. And so, if you want, I am all for all the dating apps, all the websites, if it works for you, and they all can work, you can meet someone anywhere. There's not one way, right way, wrong way. But it gets complicated when it's like, all I'm getting is sex from people, but I don't really want that. So that's when it's time to see, oh, that's not what you want, so let's look inward and see maybe if there's something that you're presenting that, I don't mean in a like violating kind of way, just mean like in consensual situations, it's important to look and see what you're presenting to see why you're getting that result.
So how might somebody play Tinder and win with it?
I love that's great. Well, I know people who've met people on Tinder and they're like relationships with people they've met.
So what did they do? They didn't hook up immediately?
No, some have. It's more about weeding out people who aren't aligned with what you want. And also, like for me, just real quick story with online. I'm single and dating, and always that's my forever status: single and dating. And
what's your job?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. She understands me so well. And so it was interesting because this guy and I matched on, it was like OkCupid. We messaged a few times. At some point he's like, can I have your phone number? And I said, actually no, I don't give my phone number out before meeting in person. That's just a boundary I have, personal boundary, and everyone's different, whatever. That was my personal boundary. And I said, the app is on our phone, so let's meet somewhere. We can do it through the phone. it's just like texting, it's just through the app. He got so angry and started calling me names and all these things, and I'm like, well, guess what? He just got weeded out. So things like that are really good ways to see someone's character or level of anger level or just all those kind of things. And are they going to respect your boundaries? That's a very basic boundary for someone to not understand. And for me, it was like, absolutely not. You know?
Well, I guess it also depends how technologically astute they are, because some people want for text.
Well, guess what? If you can't be technologically savvy enough to bring your phone on a date, then we probably aren't a good match anyway. That's just, again, personal feelings, right? These are good questions.
Do you have a statement?
Oh yeah, I was just going to make a comment backtracking on the stuff one way earlier.
Go ahead.
About the losing the courtship from the men. And I would say as a younger person, I much prefer to pursue whoever and not men or women. Yeah, I was just going to say, for me, like, it's easier to pursue instead of having someone constantly like nagging me by persuasion. Like, I don't call that courting. I call that, I already answered you 5 times. Take my fucking no. Like, why are you trying to, now you're just not respecting me because you're trying to change my mind. So that's how I kind of feel.
Sales resistance.
I just want to add to that. I totally hear you. But again, Rouge knows what she likes, and Rouge knows what she wants in terms of courtship, or, you know, who takes the first step or calls people, who sets that tone. She knows for herself. It's just important to know what that is for yourself, because there's a lot of people who don't even know that, and then they're like, why is no one pursuing me? And it's like, well, okay, so in coaching, like, I've been like, well, because you're the one pursuing everybody, but they aren't aware. You're very aware, so that totally, I get that.
Yes, at the same time, I would say there's a magic in co-creation, where it doesn't feel like you're either pursuing or being pursued, but you're both mutually interested.
But everyone's different.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I try to, you know, that's the thing I've learned in doing this for 10 years. And, you know, and again, I think there is a generational difference too. I've noticed, you know, Rouge is younger than us. I don't want to give up ages. But, you know, I've learned from working on, like, with college students especially, they date in a totally different way than we did, you know. It's just very interesting how it's all different. You know, for me, I feel like
There's a lot of difference in different ethnicities too, because having taught college forever, and having read all their sex histories and all that, I know quite a bit of what's going on.
That's interesting.
And there are Armenians who date very differently than Hispanics date, and then there's kids that were raised by hippies that date differently than those do. And so there's a huge, you know, ethnic generation gap as well.
Comment?
I'm curious. I ran marriage-minded introductions for 40 years, and I stopped doing it because... Yes, I'm a matchmaker, a shotgun. But I stopped doing it because of the online dating stuff, particularly OkCupid, because I could get free matches on there. And I started just doing relationship coaching that brought them to how to use those sites. How do you combine, if you're doing personal matchmaking now, that with the, how do you put that together?
Well, let me tell you. So this is a really quick story. I was hired at a matchmaking agency here in LA. Worked this year, didn't last long there because it was a very archaic way of, it just isn't up to date. The company I was working for was around for about 25 years. Even their computer system, they were working on paper. So paper cards, I was going through bins, matching people through paper, and oh, here's a person, here's another person.
Say, oh gee, we see this.
Yeah.
That was fine. I would go through the
I mean, there were some algorithms in place, but they were all very archaic. And that's the thing, as a 30-something-year-old, I saw that was different. They weren't up to date. There are some that are up to date, but the other thing is, you know, a lot of the clientele were higher end, CEOs, celebrities, people who didn't mind paying more money to not recognize online. Or on the days in business, is because it's people who want to remain anonymous in some way, or are paying money because they're either too busy or they feel like there's going to be a higher quality of people, which sometimes there wasn't. Sometimes the people in there were actually worse than I've seen online,
right.
which is ironic.
That's why I stopped doing it, because I figured they have so much possibility of finding exactly the right person online. I got 1 million people online at a given time. How could I, on my 500 people that I've got in my box?
Well, and here's the other thing though. I mean, for an older demographic, that's still a viable option because there's a lot of like baby boomers and older who are still afraid of the internet in those ways, like using it for dating. So they might want to pay somebody, a matchmaker, to help them, you know.
Before we move on to the next question, I want to piggyback on this idea of how technology, the internet, apps, all that, specifically the internet, has changed the world, has changed relationships, has changed vocabulary and lexicon, developed glossaries for all this jargon. There's a few critical years. You know, you can look at the early 90s where the altnet groups, you know, alt.polyamory.com, you know, was created at some point around 91, which may be the first time that word was ever written and published. Prior to that, Mono-Amory's bouquet of lovers, but it was poly-amorous. She made it a point that it was a dashed invented word. But once you get to the point where you can co-create culture online, it's just exponential growth. I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit about how these things have changed pre-internet, post-internet.
That's actually a very good question. And part of what the question might be is, what is a community? And how do you define it? And how do you create one? Up until the invention of the telegraph, the transmission of information was how fast can you ride on a horse? And that's how fast you get your ideas across the continent, and how fast does the sailing ship go? And then people would adopt those ideas and feel that they were part of a community, and they would continue on and they build on it, and again they would send it. So it was a very leisurely process, and people would actually change very slowly because the rate of change that was approaching them was again very slow. That has changed all through the 20th century. I mean, it's not just the internet. The internet is the final, most visible step. Radio, the ability to hear live transmissions from Germany. My grandmother remembers hearing Hitler talking from the Bundesbad, or whatever that was called, in Germany in 1936, 1937. Hearing a live broadcast, it was one of the first. And so the world had become a smaller place because a voice in Germany was coming out of a radio here. In terms of how we became sort of a polyamory movement, is that there was things like the telephone, and there were things like putting newspaper ads in the free press and letting people know that there's going to be a meeting here at 2809.5 Sunset Boulevard. So everyone, and you would advertise it 3 or 4 weeks in a row, and then, you know, people would show up and they'd get to meet each other in person. And eventually, telephone lines, telephone trees were created, where I would call Rye, and Rye would call his 2 girlfriends and maybe his best buddy. And those were ways to get our information out, and suddenly anyone that I could reach on the telephone was a part of my community, potentially. That has just been, you know, reinforced by the fact that now I can get online and reach me a half an hour before I get here, you know, through a Facebook post, you know, telling me what's going on. Whereas I would have had to get a letter from him, you know, a century ago, or show up on the day and be informed. And so I do feel like I have a community that is much wider spread than ever before. But I still like the face-to-face.
I think an overall message you're making here is that communication creates culture. And as you update forms of communication, including face-to-face, there's a creation process happening in every conversation. And where you get a culture is when you're getting many, many people sharing that conversation. And when you look at, how do I put this? I read a 220-page dissertation on the idea of the domestic discipline culture, which is in the home. It's a relative of BDSM, similarities. But what was unique about the impact that communication, the internet, had on it, is that these very isolated relationships could suddenly share their most private moments, either via text or photos or whatever, with each other. And the sharing process influencing kind of a panopticon. Everyone is watching each other and being watched. And that sharing process creates memes, creates variations, creates lexicon, creates similarities and differences, and it spurs a further conversation in the home. So the thing is, hey, I saw, person X, screen name Y doing this thing. Maybe we should do this thing, and things go viral. Without communication, you can't have culture.
That's fascinating. And certainly polyamory took off because of the internet, because people who were drawn to such a thing and such a lifestyle could actually find each other. And many of them were geeks, and so they were on the internet earlier than everybody else was. So they found each other, and the internet did much to build polyamory movements. And, as for cyber communication, it's really fascinating what's happened to all of us who are glued to our phones, is that many people really get to the point where they lack the ability to have face-to-face conversations. They're really comfortable texting, they don't have really long attention spans because they want to check their phone and see who else has messaged them, and they're interested in things that are about them rather than things that are a general presentation. So if, let's say I'm saying something and somebody there's kind of bored, she's looking at her phone. And that's really interesting because it's to her, about something that matters in her personal life. And, we're also seeing that in terms of targeted advertising. Like everything is like, well, what is he going to be able to, what does he really want to buy? We'll flash him with all that. And we already figured it out. If your Facebook is on, it's already recording you, even if you didn't do a search for it.
It's recording us now.
Leanna, are you worried that this new type of interacting is going to lead to a lower birth rate?
Who knows? As an anthropologist, I watch culture. I don't worry about it. People still like to have sex, and sex still leads to pregnancy, whether it's planned or not. So we're still going to see babies.
Thank goodness for that.
I just want to add, we could do a whole couple hours on technology and dating. I mean, seriously. I mean, maybe we should. I mean, I work a lot with that. I mean, I'm at the age now where I'm like, oh my God, before Match.com, and which is weird to even be, oh my God, like pre-Tinder, or pre-Facebook. And it's changed everything. It's changed everything. I mean, I grew up in a small town in Ohio where, similar to Rouge in some ways, perhaps. It's a religious, it's a Bible Belt sort of, southern Ohio near Kentucky. And, all you knew, I didn't know anything about anything other than monogamy, like you said earlier, way earlier, dating, marriage, kids, corporate job, and then until you die. And so I moved to LA, I lived in Europe too, but the internet is where you learn, for better, for worse, about so many other things and lifestyles and meeting other people. I mean, in terms of dating, you could, before, like, we were talking about, like, the Pony Express and letters and stuff, like, you could never just go online and find someone from here to Chicago and be like, oh, okay, let's meet. I'm gonna be in Chicago for work in 2 weeks, let's meet. That could be someone you're gonna end up, like, being in a relationship with. Like, that's insane. Like, it's the future, you guys. It's the future. Like, it's crazy, I had so many other thoughts, and I've forgotten all of them now.
I wanted to move on to another question from the audience.
This was way back we were talking about the idea of pursuit and seduction and all that. And it seemed like you guys were conflating the ideas of pursuing someone and having a lasting, intimate and vulnerable relationship. And I don't think those ideas actually need to be conflated. Because I can think of examples. For example, my stepbrother, who I know met his now wife when they had sex at a party. And I imagine there wasn't a ton of, romancing going on. They were drunk,
For those who may not have heard the statement in question, basically the idea that there is no direct causation or correlation between the courtship process and the longevity of the relationship. And I agree with that 100%. And I think that what we were saying was that values need to match on that. And sometimes whatever we attempt to do has an effect, and sometimes it doesn't. Right? Like we could demand courtship and end up with a one-night stand. We could have a one-night stand. Oops, let's actually have a 5,000 night stand.
Right, so we're just saying it's important to be clear because there's no right or wrong way. And I know couples who slept with each other on the first date and they've been married for years, whatever. But just meaning, I feel like there's a lot of times people aren't even aware. Or I know people all the time, and regardless of gender, who are like, oh, I slept with this person and I love them and we're gonna be a couple. And I'm like, did you have a conversation with them about the fact that you think you're in a relationship? They're like, no. And I'm like, well, you probably should have that conversation. Because that person might not feel that way. They might be like, that was just amazing sex. I'm gonna go back to my girlfriend or work, but you don't know. And people don't have those conversations. There's so many assumptions we make, So, but I hear,
And I think it's fascinating, like how does somebody have like a one-night stand or a hookup and know and that it's going somewhere, and how do other people just say, well, because it was a one-night stand, it can't go anywhere because they're not the kind of person I would want to be with if they would do that kind of thing.
That's interesting.
Groucho Marx.
So, I think that's sort of been the challenge of Tinder, because people can swipe through people so easily, hook up with them so quickly, and not have a moment to really assess whether this could have legs.
Well, and it started as a hookup app.
Right.
So, a lot of times now, I'll interact with singles or even when I'm on it and matching with people, they'll be like, why are you on here? Like, I thought, are we having sex? And I'm like, not necessarily. So it's morphed into not just a hookup app. Like, people do have relationships that they've met from Tinder. Like, it's morphed into just general dating. And if you want sex, you can find it there too.
I've been closely observing the Tinder phenomenon since before Tinder, because Tinder is the hetero version of Grindr. Even though there are options to pursue same gender on Tinder, that wasn't his intention. It was to reinvent Grindr, which was specifically a male-male gay sex app, which included HIV sex. It was meant so that you could fuck in the bathroom at clubs. And that was a way to meet each other within the same GPS area. Oh, there's a hot guy 250 feet away with the same serodiscordant status as myself. Let's do this. And so it's largely anonymous and that kind of thing. And they knew from the earliest days of Tinder that would not translate well with other demographics. They knew that from the beginning, and it was a constant debate internally and in the media, debating what should it look like. And oddly enough, what really kicked off Tinder into the stratosphere of the mainstream was the Olympics.
Yes, I remember this.
4 years ago, when there was the Olympics, we had some of the most attractive people on earth all in the same area, hundreds of thousands of people, all wanting to hook up with each other. And as the media covered their international usage of the app, the mainstream became aware that, hey, we can do this too.
Well, I think another factor is that women are more and more out earning men, and they can play at sex and at life more the way men do. So they don't need to go through an elaborate courtship and have a guy prove to them that he can buy dinner, which somehow demonstrates that he has a job and has earning potential and can fund the family or something.
Or a credit card.
Because we have women, as you had on your first panel, who are funding their own lives. And so when women and men are on equal playing terms, then we can better actualize real female sexuality.
I 100% agree, and I will add to that I feel like the millennials, I love millennials, by the way. Like, I feel like they're misunderstood. That's a whole other conversation, though. I think they're great, and I think they're super open-minded, which is what we need in this world. But so, I will say, though, that I think that, I lost my train of thought again. No.
Hollywood
Millennials.
I wanted to comment on how feminism has directly impacted this culture and this movement, which in the last 50 years would have been about dead center in the whole process. And how I'm not 100% certain that anything has really changed in the bedrooms. I think that men have been pretty sexually wild for a long time. I don't think our parents are talking about swinger bars the way to. I don't think our grandparents, which you know, we're talking about World War II veterans, founding these swinging standards and key parties, where you go to the party, you put your keys in the fishbowl, and you go home and fuck whoever pulls out the keys, right? I don't think that so much has changed. I think what's changed is talking about it, being out about it, being on display, being on Facebook Live, being out to your family, your friends, your work, you know, being on display as sexual beings. I think that's what's really changing.
I remember I was going to say, it all relates. I think that millennials have grown up generally with parents and specifically mothers who were very strong women. And I think because of that, both younger guys and girls are afraid of women, you know, who are outrunning men and all these things. It's like they grew up around it. I mean, personally for me, I tend to, in my life, I've tended to date younger men. And one of the reasons why I have is because they're not intimidated by ambition and alphaness and like me knowing what I want and me not wanting to hang out with them all the time because I have a full life and I have, you know, or maybe I'm dating other people. Younger guys are way more open, or have been in my experiences, and older guys are more like, wait, but aren't you gonna like join into my life? And you're gonna be wifey, right? And you know, you're ambitious and pursuing things and traveling. Oh no, that's too much. It's too much. So I do feel like the younger generation they're not as concerned about gender in all of those realms. So whether it be, you know, LGBTQ, you know, it's like LGBT, all these, right? Those things, but also higher gender roles, traditional gender roles. Millennials aren't as concerned about those things either.
There's just too perfect of a dovetail here to talk about your writings on this matter, what Erin just said. This is just too good. Regarding women who may never get married.
Oh, I wrote that so long ago. I wrote that in 1993, and it's more true today than ever. And I was like looking at this and see, actually the first women that really were the model of this were African American women, because they had strong matriarchal families. The women got whatever they want because of what their own efforts. And then eventually we started seeing more and more women becoming financially independent and deciding for themselves that whether marriage was a choice rather than a necessity. And I think the thing that was the hardest for women in other communities was to accept the whole thing, like go through the motions of not marrying and just dating, and they couldn't admit it to themselves that they really didn't want to. Where the two women that were on the first panel openly said, I don't want kids, hard to meet women who would openly say it, even though their behavior belied it.
Private thoughts versus public thoughts. And which goes to my point earlier about I'm not sure the private thoughts changed all that much. You know, they were just more open about these things.
I liked your point earlier about finding people who are in alignment with what your means, your philosophy is, and that your philosophy will be possibly changing, you know, over time, even by tomorrow. The human condition is one of enormously intelligent, enormously sexual people who can invent things on the fly, and that's what we're doing today. That's what we've been doing for the last, you know, who knows how long. And you know, if I invent something here, somebody else has to catch up on the East Coast. It's just wonderful. And you know, I personally can walk down the street and fall in love 5 times in a day. I mean, if I had to act on all that, I don't know that I could. But certainly, you know, there are enough really wonderful human beings out there that if I just stop for a moment and look around, I'm going to find one in any direction I look. And I think that's true of everybody.
I see that all the time when someone says, there's no good people